of people think that the face, the way it looks, the structure, the craniofacial structure is actually set in stone. That's like your genetics, you're born with it. But there's actually more epigenetic factors, like we talked about, with the way your tongue is positioned on the roof of your mouth. Kids, they might have like ADD. And the first thing the doctor will do is just prescribe them Adderall and not, I mean, this could be a factor because they're not sleeping well. So they're not able to pay attention. They're not getting that restorative deep sleep where they're detoxing their brain and, not just for kids, but adults too. Like you said, there's people in their 50s and 60s that wake up feeling exhausted, fatigued, and this could be a really big factor that they're not getting the restorative sleep because if you're not getting restorative sleep, digestion's going to be off,
Hormones.
fat burning hormones, your cortisol might be out of control, your melatonin might not, so everything is affected by it. So really the key to your health is having a holistic mouth solutions, which is what this doctor is promoting in his book. I don't think enough people are really talking about it. I know there's more people talking about nasal breathing now, but the root cause of mouth breathing is having a small mouth, not big enough for the tongue.
Today's show with Lexi Joy is brought to you by Myoscience Nutrition, tools to help optimize your micronutrient levels. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the importance of nasal breathing, the importance of proper tongue position, and how doing these two different tips that you're going to learn about today, that is nasal breathing and proper tongue position, how that can actually improve your body's ability to oxygenate blood. It can actually change the shape of the bones in your face and make your face more physically attractive. There's actually real hard science here. It's a very important conversation. But it's also important to understand that micronutrients like vitamin D and vitamin K2 are very important to optimizing the health of your bones and the health of your musculoskeletal system. Now, I know it's summertime, so you're probably not thinking about vitamin D because, hey, you go outside, but do you wear sunscreen? Do you hang out in the shade? Do you wear a big hat to avoid sun exposure on your face, shoulders, and arms? Are you covering up when you go outside? If you answered yes to any one of those questions, you might be at risk for having vitamin D insufficiency, even though you're spending time outdoors during the summer months. So if you're not getting full body sun exposure and if you're vigilant about wearing sunscreen, you should consider the essential fatty nutrients from Myoscience. What makes this product very unique is it features therapeutic levels in their optimal forms of both vitamin D3 and vitamin K2 in its MK7 form. What's unique about this is made naturally from biosynthesis through fermentation. There's no additives or solvents or any yucky compounds in this. It's a really unique raw material derived from Italy, and I think it has really good research, and that's why Myoscience is offering it to people like you who are interested in optimizing the health of their musculoskeletal system. And anecdotal evidence suggests that vitamin D can also help improve sleep, so you might want to dose it with dinner, with a meal before you go to bed. So you can support your body's musculoskeletal system by going over to myoscience.com. That's myoscience.com, myoscience.com. Check out the essential fatty nutrients, which features vitamin D3 and vitamin K2, and you can save using the code podcast at checkout. So as I mentioned earlier, this conversation, we take a real deep dive into the importance of your tongue position, into breathing, into what to do if you have a deviated septum, if you have a clogged nose, if you have trouble breathing through your nose. You will benefit from this conversation, particularly about how and where to put your tongue when you're just hanging out doing work, when you're driving, and how to improve nasal breathing and how to reoxygenate and revitalize the tissues, those mucosal tissues in your nose. It's a really great conversation. Lexi is an awesome person. She has a master's degree in human nutrition, and she actually works with clients as well. So I'll put links below to her contact information, to some of the books and resources that we talk about. Without further ado, let's cut back to it with Lexi Joy. Thank you for coming on. I'm really excited today to talk all about airway health and some of the aspects about the Mediterranean diet due to your heritage, being from Lebanon, family from Lebanon, and so forth. But you have a master's degree like myself in human nutrition, which is great. And you got into the whole rabbit hole of proper nasal breathing and all of the issues with like a small palate and improper tongue position, tongue tie, which is such an important aspect for various, contributing to many diseases that people don't really understand, with fatigue issues and blood sugar issues and high blood pressure. I mean, there's so many different facets here. You shared with me personally sort of your backstory, but just for everyone listening, so that we can keep people engaged into, why they should care about how they breathe and their tongue position and how important it plays in their health, right? How did you get into this whole rabbit hole of airway development in humans?
So I have TMJ, which is basically the temporomandibular joint. So that's up here. It connects your skull to your jawbone. So I've been having issues with that my entire life, basically, because of the size of my palate being too narrow. I also was born with a tongue tie that went undiagnosed until about a few years ago when I basically diagnosed it myself by doing my own research. So I just felt that, something wasn't right from all the dentists and orthodontists I've been seeing my entire life. They were missing something. They're like, something's not right. I could see like very subtle changes in my face that no one else could see, except maybe like these epigenetic orthodontist doctors that I've been finding lately. So I really just wanted to bring to light these topics because I want people to be aware of it, not only for themselves, but if they're parents and they have children. A regular orthodontist may not be assessing their airway or the size of their tongue in proportion to their craniofacial structure in their mouth. Like this is such an essential part of your anatomy, like from the maxilla down to the mouth, because your mouth is the first entry point of where food is entering the digestive tract. It's where the enzymes in the saliva start breaking down food for digestion. Your mouth is where you chew and swallow. So the form of it really dictates ideal functionality. So if the form is off, the function is definitely going to be affected. And like you said, metabolically, it definitely has implications because when we breathe through our nose, which is the ideal way, we synthesize nitric oxide, and that's a vasodilator. So that will help regulate blood pressure. And we see many people nowadays with sleep apnea and high blood pressure. And this could be like the root part of the problem, like, aside from their diet and weight. It could be that their craniofacial structure is impaired. Like they have what Dr. Felix Liao would call like impaired mouth syndrome. Like when was the last time you went to a doctor and they're like, let me assess your nasal breathing or let me see how your tongue is positioned in your mouth? Like when do they do that?
It's insane. I mean, that should be one of the first things, especially as a pediatrician, that is evaluated, but it's often not. And here's the thing that I find with clients as well, Lexi, you tell me if I'm sure we agree or have similar stories like this. When I work with people and they have fatigue issues, they have blood sugar issues, they can't lose weight, their body's changing, and we get back to, and they tell me what they eat, when they eat, how they're like, everything seems pretty good. Then we start to look at other factors, like what else could it be? And they say, oh yeah, I do wake up with a dry mouth, or my spouse told me I snore, and I do have restless sleep. I wake up and I feel like, I feel terrible, like a truck ran over me, I'm not recovered. So we start to address, and I say, well, have you ever considered like mouth taping? Just starting there. Oh, I can't breathe through my nose, so I'm definitely not going to do that. It's like, okay. And the point of that backstory is people just think, oh, I can't breathe through my nose, so therefore I'm not going to try to even focus on this because they just rule that out as like implausible. But what I found with some people, and everyone's different with like a deviated septum and anatomical features, but once you start to learn to breathe through your nose, it gets better. Just like if you don't ride your bike, you're going to get sore legs every time you ride. That doesn't mean that you should ever ride. It means you need to train more, right? What are your thoughts there with sort of that resistance to, I can't breathe through my nose, so therefore I'm not going to even try this?
Absolutely. I've heard it before. And there's actually some exercises that you can do at home to enable nasal breathing. One is to really like press the back of your tongue to the palate. Like if you're saying the word sing, like that, the motion of the ing part has your tongue like kind of pressed up at the back of your palate. So you want the back of your tongue like basically on the palate of your mouth. And you'll feel like kind of a relief almost like when you're mouth taping, it's kind of a similar feeling to that. But my assumption is that they're not placing their tongue in the correct position in their mouth to begin with. And that's what has allowed almost like their jaw to drop down and their nasal passageway to be like a little bit obstructed there. Because the maxilla here, like part of the bone, connects to the side of your nose. So obviously if it's not growing forward properly because the tongue wasn't in the right position from a young age, it's going to fall down. Your breathing is going to be impaired. Because our nose is just cartilage. It needs support.
Right. And there's like erectile tissue in there that's inducible and things like that. James Nestor talks a lot about this in his book. Now, from the research and interviews that you've had and so forth with different doctors and practitioners and all that, let's say someone is, say, 50 years old or in their 60s, and they've been a mouth breather their entire life. What is the probability of them sort of relearning these strategies over time? The conversations I've had, with Mark Brahenna and other dental specialists and so forth, that this is changeable. But what have you seen and so forth? And I guess, along those lines, how quick did it take for you to sort of notice the improvements in your own facial structure and symptoms and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. I suffered from nasal congestion most of my life. I've actually had to have surgery for a deviated septum and collapsed nasal valve. And it did buy me like 5 years of better nasal breathing. But now it's like, if I don't make a conscious effort to breathe from my nose, I'm a natural mouth breather, but I'm like very, very conscious about putting my tongue on the roof of my mouth. And I think that if you're someone that wants to change your habits, it doesn't matter how old you are, because I've seen cases of 50, 60-year-olds that are getting these appliances with, epigenetic orthodontists like Dr. Liao or biological dentists, and they're like, they don't have to wear their CPAP machine at night anymore. They're breathing better.
Wow.
So it can definitely help, project forward the maxilla, but also kind of mimic what your tongue would be doing to your maxilla, like giving that force.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, sorry.
No, you're good. Keep going.
Yeah, I think if they have proper, training from maybe a myofunctional therapist, someone that can maybe teach them how to use their mastication muscles better and chew better, and how to use their tongue, doing tongue exercises, they can see changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's possible at any age. Obviously, the younger the better, as far as changing bone structure faster. But it can happen in older people too.
Yeah.
Especially women, because their bones aren't as strong.
That's a good point. But I think it gives people hope, that this is not like, oh, I'm beyond adolescence, so therefore I shouldn't focus on it. It's like, no. This is really malleable. I mean, I didn't learn about this until 2016, so I was in my mid 30s at that point, early 30s. And I've made tremendous changes in all sorts of, I don't think my face has completely changed shape, but I noticed my lips, I used to have this, like, my upper lip had that classic mouth breather look to it. And it bothered me, but I never knew what to do with it. And no physician up to that point in my life had ever addressed it. It wasn't until doing podcasts like this that it was talked about, right? Can you hold up that book again? I think that's a good resource for people. Amazing. 6-foot tiger, 3-foot cage. Gotcha. Well,
great analogy.
It's awesome. I guess there's just a few sort of personal things that I want to continue to talk about, and then we'll get into the sort of the big picture of maybe why this happens, why the tongue tie happens, and what we can do about it. But you mentioned myofunctional therapy and maybe working with a practitioner. Did you work with a practitioner to learn about tongue position and sort of jaw exercises?
I kind of did my own thing first. I have seen a myofunctional therapist a few times to kind of train the tongue a little bit in preparation for my tongue surgery that I had. I had to get a few of them, and I still have to get one more, I think. But they have to expand the maxilla more before doing it, because they want me to have enough room in my mouth for my tongue. So unfortunately, the doctors I was seeing before I met Dr. Liao were doing things in the wrong order. They gave me a night guard to stop the clenching, and all that does is protect your teeth from wear. It doesn't actually fix the problem. So it's kind of just delaying the inevitable that needs to happen, which is expanding the palate and having more of like a forward growth, which is the ideal way to grow, is forward, because you're going to have more space in your airway. I can actually show you like a sagittal view of what the airway should look like. So let me share my screen.
Cool. That's awesome. You mean, so going back to, as you're doing that, just for folks listening, so that, like, the frenuloplasty, is that what you're saying? You will not get that until the maxilla is even more expanded?
Yeah, so the frenectomy, which is the frenulum connects the tongue to the bottom of the mouth, it was really tight. The weird thing is I was able to breastfeed as a child, so no one suspected it. But I had issues chewing and swallowing. And whenever I went to the doctor and they're like, say ah, they're like, can you put your tongue down? Like, and they didn't even think to like, maybe she doesn't have enough space. We should probably check the tongue. Like, it's just crazy that they never It's funny. I had all the red flags and no one looked at. It's just neglect. It's just crazy. And it's so simple. Like you don't have to do any fancy MRI. Like it's too cheap. I guess they don't think about it because like how are they going to profit from a tongue exam, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. So as you can see, like the ideal airway and jaw placement, this is the sagittal view. So the jaw, I mean, is good in this position because there's enough volume in the airway, like the pharynx area. On this side, the jaw is kind of protruded back, it's recessed, so it's kind of pinching the airway, especially when you're laying down.
Mhm.
If you're laying flat and it's gonna kind of fall back, your tongue's gonna relax while you're sleeping. It might, pinch the airway, and that's what causes like your body has to compensate to survive. So it's obviously gonna open its mouth to get oxygen, otherwise it's gonna die.
Mhm.
So
So this image right here, I think, is just beautiful because it really illustrates, what's happening. So I see a lot of children with this protruded jaw, and adults as well, but more so, I would say, in my own personal life with children that I see dropping my daughter off to school and her friends actually, who have a lot of orthodontics already going on, and like you just said, Lexi, the orthodontics, they're going out of order, right? Trying to correct a narrow palate. But so what are we doing? Let's go back to the tongue position. So why don't you just put the arrow in the protruded jaw where the tongue should be kind of hanging out?
right. So like kind of up here, given that you have enough space, can you see the arrow?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, yeah. So if you have enough space, it should kind of sit on the palate and like not touch the front teeth. It should be behind the front teeth. So it should just be kind of relaxed up there.
Kind of hanging out. It's kind of
Hmm.
it's like it's mannerisms. That's where your tongue should be, my friend. So now let's go through the order of operations or the mechanisms here. So instead of our tongue just being lackadaisical wherever it wants to be in the mouth, we have it in that hanging out little spot there. And is that one of the main mechanisms sort of driving or preventing the retruded jaw and increasing the airway, or is it the combination? Like, talk to us about why that is important.
So I think what you're asking is like, why is the retruded jaw happening in the first place?
Yeah.
So, well, there's a few theories. I don't know if anyone's truly kind of like actually came to a conclusion, but the first is like the maxilla bone didn't project forward. And that could be because the tongue was never in the correct position because of a tongue tie. It could be because of nutrient deficiencies, maybe some fat soluble vitamins. It could also be the lack of the mastication muscle forces. Like, let's say that the food was mostly refined and pureed. So there wasn't enough, force and muscle force that would pull the bones to grow in the right direction.
Mhm.
Because what are babies eating after, assuming they're breastfed? They're probably eating pureed food, baby food, something like that. So it's not like they're chewing on hard bones and ligaments that would really promote that growth. Because, when a woman goes through menopause, they tell you, okay, do some weightlifting to prevent osteoporosis because strength training helps with bone density. It's kind of the same concept here. So the bones in their most crucial times really need to be like the chewing forces need to be happening, and there needs to be enough, tongue. The tongue is almost like an orthodontic appliance
Mhm.
to hold the maxilla up so that it's growing in the right direction, which is forward.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's what I was kind of looking to see. That wasn't clear for me in terms of like a mechanism of action of what is the tongue doing. So it's, yeah, think of it almost as like a retainer of sorts. Where as a kid, I had the expander. You go in there with the wrench and twist it, but the tongue is doing that. So it's opening up, creating that space. Here's one thing that I was kind of curious with. I mean, at the time of this recording, there are shortages of all sorts of infant formula. Um, I know for some women that have children that can't latch, or for some women that just aren't producing enough milk. Obviously, this can be scary and concerning and all of that. I look at it as almost like a blessing in disguise, of causing new parents to like, hey, let's get back to the basics. Let's talk about the importance of breastfeeding and why kids need to breastfeed and so forth. From the moms and friends that you have and so on, do you think that's happening, or like do you think that there's a blessing in disguise in this formula shortage?
I don't know. Like, I agree. I think everyone agrees, even the people that are feeding their babies formula, that breastfeeding is the like ideal way to nourish your baby, not only for the bonding, but obviously like the nutrients that you really can't replicate in formula. Even in cow's milk and goat's milk, like like the formula from, I mean, the breast milk nutrient profile is perfect for the baby. It doesn't have too much protein like cow's milk. So obviously the babies can't digest that at an early age. Um, what I'm noticing is that the people that I know personally just cannot breastfeed their babies, whether because it's because they have twins and they don't have enough milk for them and they were born tiny and they need like the calories. Otherwise, like they're not going to grow.
Hmm.
Or like, I mean, that's mostly the problem. Or they're doing breast milk and formula in some cases.
Hmm.
I think it could be a blessing in finding other solutions or maybe making better formulas that don't have seed oils. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've even the organic formulas have seed oils. It's just
It
like
Well,
crazy.
the organic formula. I mean, I was so disappointed. Deanna, when we had Nez, she's going to be 10 in June. The Whole Foods was across the street from the birthing center. So I thought, okay, well, if she wasn't producing that much milk and it was mostly colostrum and stuff, I'm like, oh, let's just go see what they have, because I was getting food there anyway, or while we were at the hospital. And the first ingredient, Lexi, maybe this is a surprise to some, people listening, but it was brown rice syrup, which is basically sugar. Second ingredient was defatted pasteurized milk, cow's milk, right? And then basically the corn syrup solids and a bunch of like synthetic vitamins. And I wanted to get into tongue tie, and there was folic acid, cyanocobalamin. So this was at Whole Foods, right? You would think that, oh my gosh, you could get probably the best, if there is an ideal breast milk, infant formula, alternative to breast milk that you could find it there, but couldn't find anything. So yeah, we supplemented with raw goat's milk, and some other things, and HMOs, the oligosaccharides. But it's crazy that there's really like there's a monopoly on infant formula. You have Abbott, you have a few different companies that basically have the monopoly. And I've been working with friends trying to actually create a really cool infant formula. And the FDA regulations, no one will touch it unless you have like $50 million to just drop on building your own manufacturing facility. And basically the FDA auditors are going to be at your doorstep like every month. And so it becomes a regulatory nightmare. And yeah, it's just challenging that there's no good options for people out there, short of, defatted milk and pasteurized and corn syrup solids and all that stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it kind of ties in with like you're familiar with Weston A. Price and how he kind of traveled the world actually and observed these different ancestral tribes, and anyone that was introduced Western diet of processed refined foods that wasn't like the typical whole food, their their ancestral diet, they would actually have like the narrow jaws, crooked teeth, they just didn't look as healthy. And when they compared them to people that only ate their traditional diet, the traditional diet, like the Hadza, for example, like they all have perfect teeth, no, and they only eat like what blood and milk and animal organs and things like that. So I think it's partially the nutrient density of the foods that's helping with the bone growth, which I think is key. You cannot get vitamin A from plants. I mean, there's so many things you can't get from plants, but also the texture of the food, chewing it versus, pureed food. I think that also influences how your bones grow because the muscle will always win.
Right.
Muscle versus bone, the muscle wins.
That's a excellent point. Speaking of that, let's get into, because we have the great illustration here. We can talk about nutrient deficiencies and then also tongue tie. So how does a tongue tie, maybe what is a tongue tie, and how does that contribute to the protruded jaw and then all of the lack of nasal breathing and more of a focus on mouth breathing and all of the developmental issues? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So I'm going to open my mouth.
Yeah.
That's the frenulum. So it was even tighter than that before. I've had a couple surgeries to try to fix it. But at this point, might as well wait until the mouth is big enough for the tongue. But If it's tied too tightly, there may be issues with breastfeeding and latching. Like you said, your daughter they fixed it when she was young.
Yeah, 8 or 7, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so they didn't catch it early on.
Mm-mm.
Oh,
It
wow.
wasn't that tight, but it was definitely, they would say it was mild. And because she definitely was a mouth breather and all of that symptomology. So they went in there and just snipped a little bit of it. And it seems to have helped, when I look at her pictures and then how her teeth are coming in. But anyway, go on.
Okay, yeah. So, like a lot of people think that the face, the way it looks, the structure, the craniofacial structure is actually set in stone. That's like your genetics, you're born with it. But there's actually more epigenetic factors, like we talked about, with the way your tongue is positioned on the roof of your mouth. Like kids they might have like ADD. And the first thing the doctor will do is just prescribe them Adderall and not like, I mean, this could be a factor because they're not sleeping well. So they're not able to pay attention. They're not getting that restorative deep sleep, like where they're detoxing their brain and, not just for kids, but adults too.
Mhm.
Like you said, like there's people in their 50s and 60s that wake up feeling exhausted, fatigued. And this could be a really big factor that they're not getting the restorative sleep because if you're not getting restorative sleep, you're not going to have your detox pathways, autophagy is not going to work, digestion's going to be off, everything's
Hormones.
fat
Yeah.
burning hormones like your cortisol might be out of control, your melatonin might not like so everything is affected by it. So really the key to your health is having a holistic mouth, like holistic mouth solutions, which is what this doctor is promoting in his book. So I really just want to I don't think enough people are really talking about it. I know there's more people talking about nasal breathing now, but the root cause of mouth breathing is having a small mouth, not
Mm.
big enough for the tongue.
Mm.
And
Makes a
like
lot of sense.
they did studies on rats where they actually obstructed their nasal breathing and they actually observed the bone density. And I think it was only like a few weeks later that the bone density actually decreased in their alveolar bone.
Mm.
So right, I mean, if the bone density is affected that quickly, imagine what a lifetime of mouth breathing can do. Like, I don't know if you saw my post the other day about Mitch McConnell, but I think that's his turkey neck is like a lifetime of mouth breathing. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
he doesn't look fat to me. Like
Right.
his body doesn't look overweight. I think it's just the structure of his tongue is not correct.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting once you know this stuff, and then you see people who have obvious mouth, they're lifelong mouth breathers. It's really quite apparent. But going back to the tongue tie, and then possibly the micronutrient deficiencies and formula. So if you have a tongue tie, does it make it harder to latch? Is that part of it?
That's part of it. If it's really tight and severe, then it might be harder to latch. In my case, it wasn't. I was able to breastfeed for a long time, but I didn't like I hated food and everything had to be pureed for me.
Mm.
But my parents didn't know that that was a tongue tie and no doctor ever diagnosed it. I'm surprised that they didn't check your daughter's tongue when she was born. Oh, you said they did and it wasn't tight enough.
You know what? To be honest, if it wasn't for me doing this research, no one would ever know. And then finding an integrative dentist who's actually looking at this sort of thing, and then we did the myofunctional therapy. But yeah, it's not even. I don't even know if they made sure that she got all of her shots in the hospital, but the tongue tie and evaluation of the tongue and the whole latching thing, I don't know that there was much of a focus on that, to be honest, which is sad. And then you look at the data about how many parents or mothers specifically continue to exclusively breastfeed in the attrition rate is more than 50% after 90 days. So this is incredible how so many kids are not only getting all the nutrients in breast milk, but they're not, part of the, like we're picking on the airway here, but part of this is learning how to nose breathe is via breastfeeding. And I think, a lot of doctors have talked a lot about that, right? Do you have anything to further add to that?
The breastfeeding part. Well, yeah, I mean, I think if there is a problem with latching, it could be it's just like an impaired mouth syndrome, maybe not even a severe tongue tie, like mine wasn't. So, and your daughter's wasn't either. So,
Mhm.
um, but I just think it's really important for parents to really pay attention to like red flags.
Yeah.
It could be that when you open your mouth, you have teeth marks on your tongue.
Mm.
That just is an indication that your tongue is too big for your mouth.
Mhm.
Or you can even look at someone's profile. Like my jaw it's a little too short this way. It should be like further out. It doesn't look it because I'm so conscious about putting my tongue in my mouth, which has definitely helped, I think, delay worsening of the problem, because as you get older, it's just going to get worse if you don't fix it. So
Interesting. And you've alluded to, but I guess we didn't talk about the specifics about expanding your maxilla. What specifically outside of tongue position are you doing at this present time?
Mhm. So I'm going to start getting a pallet expander. It takes some time for the appliance to arrive.
Okay.
It's kind of like a DNA appliance, they call it. It's actually Dr. Liao's like his own customized appliance, but it basically expands the pallet this way. It brings it forward. There's a bottom and a top depending on if you need it. I personally do need it because both need to be wider
Mm,
to accommodate my tongue. So
okay.
yeah, I was with the last orthodontist. They didn't even consider doing that, which in my opinion just doesn't make sense. They wanted to do all this surgery. They wanted to bring my jaw forward with titanium.
Oh,
They
geez.
wanted to put like bone grafting, like in my cut my bone open and put in like a cadaver bone. I was like, whoa, no, thank
Yeah.
you. Like I'd rather expand my jaw like the natural way as much as possible.
Hmm.
Um, and they were doing things out of order. Like they gave me Invisalign. I was wearing it for 8 months and it didn't do anything to my jaw. It just helped my teeth straighten out a little bit.
Hmm.
But now that I haven't been wearing it for like a month, they're crooked again.
They go right back.
Yeah, it's like, so
Interesting.
how is that sustainable? So even I'm sure you're getting DMs too. Like you might get DMs after this, but I have people DMing me like I had orthodontic work and it messed up my face and like I can't breathe through my nose properly. I have a deviated septum. Like what can I do? People are really like in need of direction here.
Oh yeah, it's way more common than I think people talk about. We hear so much about other conditions, but this is exceedingly common. And what I think, that anytime I talk about this, I like to remind people if they can't breathe through their nose, it could be a structural issue like we talked about, but it could also be something as simple as food sensitivities, like they're eating wheat or corn or dairy and they have a sensitivity. So therefore there's congestion in their nose. So this is a symptom that we shouldn't, sort of gloss over. We should investigate a little bit further. And I just wished, and I think I have hope that more and more dentists are coming on board. There's, the MyoBrace for kids now, and that's gaining steam and everything like that, which is great. So super fascinating stuff. Do you ever, I know you like to exercise. Do you ever do mouth tape when you're actually exercising to entrain nasal breathing?
I have done it before. I
Cool.
actually wear this one. I don't know if you wear Viotape. It's really good.
Cool.
Yeah, VIO2 tape. Here, I'll show you the.
Oh, I see. Right on.
It's
48 tapes. So that's a good deal. Yeah.
comfortable too. Like it doesn't like some of them are harsh on your skin a little bit. This one's pretty comfortable.
Yeah. I've just been using the good old fashioned 3M micropore tape, but for some people it doesn't work or they can't remember. So that is nice. There's, the Somnifix has been around too for a while, which is really interesting. So getting back to tongue tie and micronutrient deficiencies, there's some research showing that folate imbalances and maybe fatty acid, fat soluble vitamins, more specifically, deficiencies in those can contribute to that. Again, this is an area that I haven't even researched at all. Have you dove into that to any extent?
Yeah, it's mainly I don't know if you read the book by it's Physical Degeneration and Nutrition by
Western
Wesley
April.
Gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was where I learned about the fat soluble vitamins playing a key role in development at that age. And it makes sense.
Right.
You need the ADEK. Otherwise, I mean, and you need fat, you need good fats. So the best quality fats are from animals
Right.
in order to absorb those vitamins.
Yeah. Yeah. Big, important point there. I like that. Now, speaking of good nutrition, so your father is Lebanese and you're a dual citizen. So you go back there. Let's talk about the Mediterranean diet. I think this is really quite fascinating. And a lot of people that I've worked with over the years, they avoid gluten and things like that here. But when they travel to Europe, it could be that they're more relaxed and calm, but it could just be that there's like a different phenotype of, say, wheat and so forth. And you talked about how, say, even garbanzo beans and hummus is prepared there. So let's talk about the food in the Mediterranean and what are some perceptions and what's your lived experience?
Right. So yeah, the perception is that the Mediterranean diet is like high in fiber, which I mean, yeah, there's definitely fiber from fruit. The perception that everyone kind of gets, I don't know if it's because doctors are promoting it this way or like the media, but everyone thinks the Mediterranean diet is like, oh, very little meat and very little animal products and mostly like whole grains and things like that. I've and olive oil, which is true. We eat cold pressed or extra virgin olive oil. That's extremely good, and it's not adulterated with any seed oils, so that part is good. From my experience, though, in Lebanon, my family is from the northern part of Lebanon, so it's like an hour north of Beirut. My experience is that it's kind of includes all the foods. Like there's red meats, poultry, eggs, dairy, because lebni, which is it's like a Greek yogurt, is a very essential part of the diet. Like we have it with almost every meal, to be honest with you. Maybe not with like fish, but we'll eat it with breakfast, lunch, pretty much daily. Goat cheese is a big part of the diet. Um,
Can
you
I
know,
pause
mhm.
you right there?
Yeah, yeah.
Hold that thought on goat cheese. The yogurt, is this something that the family would make, or would you go to the market to buy the yogurt?
No, it's homemade.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that, because I've traveled to Seoul, South Korea several times, and a lot of the elders there would talk about kimchi and how, the mother figure of the house would spend all weekend, once a month or something, making kimchi. And now that they're getting more sort of industrialized and influenced by Western culture, they don't make kimchi anymore. They just buy it from the grocery store. Is that happening in Lebanon? And then is there a qualitative difference between the homemade yogurt versus what you buy at the store, even in Lebanon?
There might be a difference. I know that my family tends to kind of lean towards the homemade yogurt, and that's probably just because of the structure with like a wife at home cooking. I know the newer generations are working now, so like it might change. There is a big portion of people that do go to the grocery store and buy it at the market, and I'm sure it's still pretty good, like fermented, yogurt. Um, I'm sure there's brands that are good, but I for the most part, like my family, they're pretty, keen on homemade yogurt.
That's awesome. Now, is
Yeah.
this something that you do? You live in Pennsylvania. You get access to raw milk. Are you making your own yogurt at home?
I sometimes do, but I like to get it from the farm that I order from just because it's raw.
Mhm.
So the way they make it is from raw milk. So it's
Awesome.
just a little bit easier for me to get it from them. Um, because I'm so like lucky to have access to that here.
Hmm. Is
So
it
that
like Amish folks that you buy from?
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Really nice.
Yeah, every state's so different. The politics of food and the legal is the fact that in some states, many states, it's illegal to buy directly from a farmer and also to buy raw dairy. The politics of food is crazy, huh? Once you start to dig into it.
It definitely is. Like why is it easier to get like I don't even know, like marijuana than it is to get raw milk? It's
Yeah.
just crazy.
It's really weird. And then these food co-ops have been like not the let's see, is it DEA? Like there's been like raids on people like selling raw milk and like in a co-op type version. I think the DEA even got involved and like just like threw all the food away. Anyway, there's a lot of different aspects that if people want to dive into it, I can link some books and resources in the show notes. But is that one of the reasons why you live in Pennsylvania right now?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to find it. I mean, California, you can find raw milk at the grocery store, actually. Like Erewhon sells the raw milk at the
Hmm.
grocery store. So that's nice. It's good to know. But it's actually really hard to get like anywhere else
Yeah.
that I've experienced.
My cousin, when he was living in Manhattan, there was like an underground source of raw dairy, and you'd meet the guy and pay cash, and like a white van would show up on a Sunday at like 6 in the morning. So I know it's doable, and it's interesting that there's this whole grassroots movement, which is pretty interesting. But let's go back to the Mediterranean diet. I interrupted you with goat cheese, and you were going to continue on with some of the futures of the Mediterranean diet. I think that's helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's also a spice. It's called za'atar. It's kind of like thyme, but it's mixed with other spices that you can't really find or I can't really find here. So I actually bring it back with me in like bundles when I come back. So yeah, we covered the dairy. We The meat is also a big part of the diet because like kibbe, which is like ground meat mixed with bulgur wheat, but the bulgur wheat is prepared in a way that limits the lectin and the anti-nutrient content. So it's easier to digest. So the way they prepare the grains like makes your body absorb the nutrients better because there's less lectins and oxalates and phytates and things like that. And that could be anything from the chickpeas to make the hummus, to the bulgur wheat, to the flour they're using to make pita bread. So it's just the ancestral wisdom that they use that's been carried down from generations. So when you go there and you eat, it's like you feel like your DNA like comes out, like you're just like nourishing your body like at a really deep level. So it just feels really good.
Hmm.
Um, Fish is a big part of the diet, poultry, lamb, like really any red meat, seafood, rice, pita bread is a big staple. It's very like thin, and I think the flour is just different, like genetically. It's not
Interesting.
the same. Wheat is different there than it is here. Like
And
I
you were
go there
saying
and eat
that,
bread, and it's not the same.
yeah, that's incredible. Just the processing, I think that's sort of lost when we focus on the macronutrients and the calories. We tend to just relegate food to this sort of just all the macronutrient composition, but the processing and like the rising of the bread and how long that takes, and then soaking grains like bulgur wheat or chickpeas beforehand and letting them sprout. Like there's these different futures that Western dietetics sort of ignores and considers irrelevant in the context of digestion and post-meal processing and immunology, which I think is a really important facet. And so, yeah, unfortunately, that's lost because you and I have shared sort of COVID information on social in terms of deaths per capita and overall mortality. How did Lebanon fare? I don't expect you to know the exact figures, but roughly compared to, say, the US or the UK.
I don't think it was as bad there, to be honest. It's a very small country, and they were having kind of political issues to begin with for the past few years. They still are to this day with like inflation is out of control there. I mean, it's way worse than it is here. The dollar, just their lira used to be about, um, it was like a 1.5 lira to the one US dollar. Now it's like 25 lira to one US dollar. So it's really, really bad. So as far as I think they just were strained at the hospitals with doctors leaving the country. That was probably, I don't know it off the top of my head. I would have to look, but it's nowhere near the US and the UK.
Mm.
I'm almost positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm almost positive. And I also wanted to mention like the seasonal fruit, like people are, they eat whatever's in season. So like when I go there in July, it's going to be figs and grapes, plums, things like that. Like if I'm still there in September, which I hope to be, it'll be pomegranates. And then they harvest the olives in the fall, like October, November. So it's like they really eat with the seasons too. So I think that's also pretty important. Change their
100%.
diet, like because it's like also their soil. I don't think it's as adulterated maybe as ours because there's not like these huge monocrop cultures there of one. It's more diverse. So you're just getting different minerals that you wouldn't be getting from the soil here. So
Yeah, that's amazing. Eating in season, it sounds really boring to a lot of people, and I think it's not really considered, but it helps us understand, because I'm sure you get the question from clients, well, I'm trying to lose weight. I heard fruit is good for me, but then, what about my blood sugar and this and that? But you bring up an eloquent point. Well, hey, look, if it's July and figs are in season and you're out and about, I mean, if you have some figs or whatever, or, if you can get it, access to it, if it grew within a 100-mile radius, I'm all for that. In context, I mean, if you're morbidly obese, okay, maybe you don't have 24 figs, right? But you get the point, is trying to consider this. And that's another aspect of Western dietetics that's not talked about. Because the importation of food, we think, okay, dried mangoes in January, if you live in Minnesota, are a good idea. Well, it's like, no, just because they can be imported from Peru or Brazil or wherever doesn't mean it's a good idea. But yeah, I am 100% in agreement with you. And there's some interesting research with regards to hibernating animals like bears specifically, and how their microbiome changes throughout the year. And it might help them process some of these seasonally available berries, for example. And so, yeah, I think it's great that you bring that up. It's just a helpful reminder for people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like to give you an idea of how close the fruit grows, I've actually reached out of my bedroom there, like, and there's a tree, and I've grabbed a Marcona almond and a grape
That's so
and
cool.
ate it in bed, like in the morning. Like that's how close they are. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And the other thing with the blood sugar argument is, yes, fruit is, if you are metabolically, not healthy, which is 88% of the country, you probably shouldn't base your diet around fruit, but there's also other nutrients in the fruit that actually are beneficial for blood sugar, like potassium and magnesium both help to regulate it. So if there's probably not getting enough of that. We know that most people aren't eating the magnesium and potassium that our ancestors did, that's for sure. So I think that could be part of like why there's like, this metabolic chaos within them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the timing of the fruit, the quantity. We mentioned earlier. I don't think I have smoothies sparingly, but I think people when they think of fruit, they think of, oh, I'm going to put a smoothie. I'm going to have a banana, a mango, frozen berries, and all these things. And you're talking like 130, 140 grams of carbohydrates, and you haven't even exercised in that particular day. And it could be winter time, right? So that would be sort of fruit out of context and hyper palatable and processed. But anyway, the point is we need to consider all of the different ways in which it's delivered or administered, or how you prepare the fruit as well. So super interesting. Let's talk about so sauna is really big in the northern parts of Europe and so forth. What do people do for relaxation in Lebanon? Do people go out to the pub, to the bar? Like what do people do? How do they?
So it's very beachy, like it's very European too, because it used to be a colony of France. So everyone there speaks French. It's very artsy. They go out to restaurants, cafes. They're very they party all day, all night. That's just how they are. Very social.
Mhm.
Um, families get together. They eat lunch almost like all the time. When I'm there, it's like I'm with so many people, and it just feels great.
That's awesome.
The traditions are pretty strong there. I mean, as far as like, not very religious, but there I'll go to church on Sundays. So yeah, I mean, the relaxation is probably mostly going to the beach. There's a lot of like beach clubs there, like pretty fancy clubs. But there's also like more chill beaches that are like you could just go to the beach. You don't have to, drink and eat and things like that.
What about sunscreen use? How is it different in Lebanon compared to here?
I don't even think I've ever seen sunscreen there, to be honest.
Really? Do people just use like oil or just nothing? They're just olive skinned?
So some people use this oil. I think it's made from like carrot seeds, which is good it does help, it has like antioxidants in it. I actually use it there, and I don't really get burnt even though I'm like lighter. Um, but I might put some SPF on my face just because like it kind of looks weird if it's getting too tan.
Mhm.
But for the most part, like no one in my family wears sunscreen. They just go outside, and maybe they put a little tanning oil, like olive oil or something, on their skin.
Mhm. Well, you brought up the social connection. I think that is so important. And there's all that research from George Slavick's lab at UCLA about the importance of that as like a future of health. And, so many people that I've worked with, they live alone, they eat alone, they do everything alone. And they're eating these great diets and they're exercising, but just there's a void there. And I think that that one is a hard one to change because like, okay, go out and just meet new friends. You're like, well, how do you just meet new friends that have, it takes a little bit more intention and effort. And if it's not baked into the culture, it can be problematic. So yeah, I don't know how we recreate that in this, hyper connected Western world where everyone's living in different, cities and this and that. But, anyway, interesting. But the question that I have for you, Lexi, is what's the primary meal? Like you mentioned, you're eating with family. Is noon kind of the big meal, or is dinner, or are both kind of a big deal?
Honestly, in my family, they're all big deals. Like we
Nice.
used to make a joke at breakfast. We'd be talking about what's for lunch. At dinner, we're talking about what's for breakfast tomorrow morning. Like they're huge meals. I feel like I eat double what I like eat here. And I come back like not able to, my clothes are too small. They're too big on me. Like when I'm there, it's literally like insane. Um, so I don't know. I think maybe lunch might be like the biggest meal there in general on Sundays. That's like kind of when all the family gets together. But it just feels like all meals are kind of a big deal, to be
And
honest.
what do you attribute the lack of gaining weight, even though you're eating more over there too? Like, I'm sure you've thought about it.
I think it's my metabolism, like my DNA just works better there. Like epigenetically, I'm more like I thrive in that environment. I don't know if it's like because of the sun all day, probably getting enough vitamin D and nitric oxide from that, and like the sea salt in the Mediterranean Sea. Like I feel like it gets into my skin or something. It's just a combination, and I sleep so well there. Like I don't sleep any nearly as good. Like I could be in the darkest room with no EMF here, and I won't sleep as well as I do in Lebanon.
Mm.
So I don't know what it is.
It's interesting to hear this from you, and we know that a lot of folks that come over, I live in the sort of tech area here in the Seattle area, Washington, and a lot of people come from Pakistan and from India they work in Amazon and Microsoft and this, and you see their health change over time, not in a favorable manner, and you wonder if if you take an animal, if you take a wolf and pull it out of the tundra in Alaska and bring it to I don't know, Southern California, it's not really going to thrive. You wonder like how much biology, like if we're manipulating biology so much for some people, some ethnic groups, and taking them out of that environment, if there are ramifications from a health perspective.
I do think like you should kind of mimic your ancestry, whether it's with diet or environment, as much as you can. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like, what were your great grandparents doing? Where were they living? What type of environment and climate were they living? Because for me, it seems like I feel like I thrive most in like a Mediterranean climate with sea and mountains nearby. It just works better for me. I don't think it's just the quality of the food. I think it's also the social structure and just like how everything's working together.
Yeah, right. Well, it's super interesting for people to think about. I mean, sometimes we can't totally change our environment, but we can travel. And that's what's beautiful about that. So Lexi, really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this information. I'll put links to your website, nutritionintuition.com, right?
Yeah,
Right?
with a two.
With a two for the intuition. Yeah, I'll put it there. Any sort of departing words of advice for people?
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing I did want to bring up just because it's so popular now with like dermal fillers, people getting that. And I think a lot of it is to address like the deficiency in the bone. A lot of people just think, oh, it's my skin, I'm getting older, I need filler. But I think there's an opportunity for like plastic surgeons to really collaborate with maybe it's epigenetic orthodontists, because yeah, maybe the filler will make you aesthetically more appealing, but it doesn't address the root cause of the problem. And maybe they're dealing with nasal obstruction. So that, if someone goes to get a nose job, like, and they just fix the nose, what if the jaw is going to cause, the septum to deviate later down the line? Like we just need to be more collaborative, I think. So
That's an excellent point.
yeah, I mean, just my parting words would really just be to pay attention to your kids' mouths. Like it's really important. You don't want to let this get out of control, because the older you get, I'm not going to say it's impossible. I think anything's possible. If something can deviate from its, ideal genetic potential, then it can probably be improved as well.
Yeah.
Like, when someone has a stroke, their muscle movement, it definitely deviates from the norm. So if it can change for the worse, it can change for the better, in my opinion. It's just a matter of finding the right person. And I'm glad to have found Dr. Lau. And now that I know that he follows you, I feel like I'm in good hands, because he's not some mainstream orthodontist. He obviously knows how to use his brain and critical think. And so I'm excited, and I'll definitely be posting my progress once I start the treatment as
Cool.
well.
That's really good to hear. Awesome,
Yeah.
Lexi. Well, thanks again for coming on the show and sharing such great wisdom, and then also a little perspective about the Mediterranean lifestyle and diet. We often hear different perspectives, and people have this sort of mental image of what you eat in the Mediterranean, but to have someone with such history and family living there and so forth, I think it's awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a great conversation.
Me as well. Well, my friend, that's it for today. Thanks as always for tuning all the way to the end. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you did, it would go a long way if you can leave us a little bit of feedback over in iTunes or in Spotify in the form of a review. anything is better than nothing. If you can just share some candid, honest feedback about some of the information that you learned in this particular episode or any other episodes that you've viewed or watched or listened to over at High Intensity Health, that goes a long way. As always, I'm thankful that you tuned in, and thank you for subscribing. We will catch you on a future episode down the road, and all the notes and resources that we talked about today will be featured in the show notes below. Until then, have an awesome day. Bye now.